Some flaw in the recording system tonight, but we are powerless, so thank you for your patience. Uh, all right. Oh, I need to flip my thing off, right? Okay. Hello again. um, I'm Kevin Griffin, in case you don't know me. And I was going to just talk tonight something that came up a couple times this week in conversations with people. Actually, Steve and I had a little exchange about this topic, and I thought it might be a worthwhile topic, the topic of studying Dharma and kind of how to approach that. Um, and I feel like maybe I have some part in sort of failing people uh, by maybe suggesting that everybody should be, really familiar with like the suttas and the Pali Canon or something, and that, and so people like run out and buy the Majjhima Nikaya and try to read it cover to cover, 152 discourses, and there's this phrase, and I don't quite know where it originates, but it, suggesting that, trying to take in too much Dharma at once, trying to swallow the Ganges. And, there can be this feeling when you're hearing Dharma teachings, like, it coming out of this inspiration, this sort of excitement and great interest, and you hear these different ideas, and, oh, where can I read that? And I want to get that book and listen to that talk, and so it can be kind of like, or like we're trying to accumulate enough knowledge, but that's, of course, not really what Dharma study is. It isn't the accumulation of knowledge, right? I mean, I think we intuitively know that, even if we get caught up in that kind of thinking. It's not like you're in medical school and you've got to, memorize the anatomy or something. You've got to cram and get all that in for the test, or you're, studying for the bar exam or something. It's much simpler than that. Although I will say that the Dharma is more extensive than the anatomy or the legal system, ultimately. But, there's this famous story of the Buddha being in the forest and picking up a handful of leaves and saying to his students, or the monks who were with him, which is greater, the leaves in my hand or the leaves in this forest? Oh, the leaves in the forest, venerable sir. And so the Buddha says, yes. And so is the difference between what I know and what I teach. What I know is like the leaves in the forest, but I only teach what this amount that's like comparable to the leaves in my hand, because that's what you need to know. You don't need to know. I'm fully enlightened, and I mean, there are these sort of suggestions that the Buddha has, like, I don't know if you would say omniscience, but some sort of supernormal mind. That seems more like mythology to me, but certainly he had a very, very profound and extensive wisdom. But he said, what I teach is about suffering and the end of suffering. And that's a great reminder. Like, oh, the Buddha said in one sentence, he tells you what he teaches, right? And there are some famous sort of examples of this. There's the story of Bahia, who was this spiritual seeker, maybe Baha'i, who lived on the other side of India, like we're given to understand that he lived somewhere like near Mumbai, I think. And he thinks he's enlightened. He's not a Buddhist. He's never studied with the Buddha, but like a god or somebody, maybe a passing visitor tells him, yeah, no, you're not. But there is somebody who is enlightened, and it's this Buddha guy, And so he walks across India. Again, there's probably some little bit of mythology in this, but we get that he like travels a long way, stopping only to rest and to eat. Walks across India, finds the Buddha. The Buddha is on alms round. It's like, and you don't disturb the Buddha when he's on alms round. It's very rude, But Baha'i is very, he's on fire with the wanting to get the teachings, and he's a very evolved student. He's not like somebody who's a beginner. It's just that he thinks he's a little further along the path than he is. And he catches up with the Buddha. Buddha, please, can you, Venerable Sir, can you just tell me, what is your teaching? This is not an appropriate time to speak Baha'i. I am on alms round. And so as always goes in the suttas, Baha'i asks 3 times. And if you ask 3 times, the Buddha will often say, okay, if you insist. This is sort of the tradition. So he finally asks the 3rd time. The Buddha's like holding his bowl. You can imagine he's like kind of hungry. So he's like, okay, I'm going to give it to you quick here. And he just says, Baha'i, in the scene is just the scene. In the heard, just the heard. In the felt, just the felt. Just the smell, taste. In the thought, just the thought. Or the perceived, just the perceived. And that's the whole teaching. And then Buddha goes off to get his bowl filled, goes for the alms round. And Baha'i, bows down. And Baha'i has this, he gets it, right? He's ready to hear the teaching. And so he has this awakening, this enlightenment experience. He walks off and because he said to the Buddha, I never know when you never know when I'll die. So I want to get the teaching right now. I forgot that part, an important part of the story, because then Baha'i walks off and gets run over by a wild cow and is killed. So, it was a good thing he got enlightened like he did. But the point being, it was just a simple teaching, and he was ready to hear it, right? And so there's a couple things in there that I think are really useful. One is, you're only going to understand what you're ready to hear. And you don't get that by reading books, right? You get it by practicing, by paying attention, by being mindful over time. And then it doesn't take a lot. So I really think, rather than trying to consume a lot of Dharma and read and study a ton of things, it's better to take one idea and just work with it and work with it and keep, something that's, and when I say work with it, I mean, for 2 weeks or a month or whatever, not for years necessarily, although that could be good too, but just sort of take something and milk it until it's, you've kind of you feel like you've gotten what you can out of it. I don't pick up a sutta collection and read 50 pages. I read 3 pages. Oftentimes I don't read an entire sutta when I'm studying the suttas. I mean, I just will oh, that phrase. Like I gave a talk on Tuesday, and I'm going to put this up very soon because I thought it was an interesting talk about this phrase, that one of the causes of suffering is the craving for extinction. Well, when I'd read that before, I'd heard that before, but I put it together with something else I was thinking about, right? It was like I was ready to hear that teaching in a new way the other day. And that really kind of awoken something in me. So it wasn't just like, oh, I read something and now no, I get that. It was rather, oh, I read something and it took my mind into all these other places. And that's one of the things that the Dharma is meant to do, that our Dharma study is meant to do, not just be information that we take, that's packaged, but rather, oh, this really gets me thinking about this and that. And then you'll find yourself starting to see that in everything, right? Like if you've ever had the experience of buying a car that you thought was a really unusual color, and as soon as you drove out of the showroom, it was like every car looked the same. It's like I know that's a ridiculous comparison, but it's just something's on your mind. Like you just become aware of something, and then you start to see it everywhere, right? So the craving for extinction was just a really interesting idea that I saw a whole lot of things it was connected to. So I just really recommend that you take this simple approach to your Dharma study. And I hope that everybody does Dharma study to some extent, and, you should, and I'm not really one who keeps Dharma books on my bedstand, because there's actually a thing called a bedstand Buddhist. I don't know if you've ever heard of them, but, because I don't read, this is just another, hint from Professor Griffin here, that reading Dharma right before you fall asleep isn't necessarily the best time to read. Like, I'll read this, is so boring and put me to sleep. Like they say, the big book, right? If you have insomnia, just read the big book, right? So, but I try to read Dharma when my mind is very sharp. So that for me is usually in the morning at some point, like that, not necessarily first thing or early in the morning, but or maybe, in the afternoon when I have a little energy and I'm like going to sit down and I've gotten some work done and I have a little space, I'll have a cup of tea and read just a page or two, not a lot. I was reading some of Ajahn Amaro today. And it's just like a couple pages, because it's like, it's so rich, Dharma teachings, right? That if you read too much, you don't get it. It just is, it's too much goes by. It's like too much chocolate, or yeah, well, let's not get into chocolate. I'll trigger people's eating disorders. So, sorry, Steve. Yeah. So, yeah, think about how you can take in Dharma best. And the other thing is, what is inspiring you? Like what speaks to you? Like when I look back over my years of studying Dharma, like when I got the Majjhima Nikaya in 1995 and I tried to read it, I couldn't read it. And I didn't really. It kind of sat there. And I wound up taking a course a few years after I had it. But at that time I was reading other things. There was, there were more Western teachers. And so there's no point in trying to read something that's just not really speaking to you. And so this again comes back to where Baha'ya is. And what I said about that, which is you're only really going to be able to understand something that you've had some kind of a taste of, that you've sort of touched it or you've experienced it in some way. And a lot of Dharma, resonates for us anyway, just because of our life experience, right? But there's some of it that, that you don't really, that can be hard to take in until you've had sort of other experiences, which is why I always, encourage people to go and retreat and to practice meditation more. And there is this partnership. It's not like, oh, just meditate, and because at least in my experience, I did a lot of meditation and I didn't understand what was happening until I read some teachings that explained to me what I had experienced. So that's another function of studying Dharma. It maybe sounds backward, like, oh, I should be reading a book to learn something that I don't know. But it's more like this idea, and I might have mentioned this phrase the other day, where the Buddha says, you have vision and knowledge and this is for the enlightenment experience, but any stage of insight, the vision, I'm not sure which is which, frankly, the vision and knowledge, but I'll say that there are these two components. One is having an experience, and then the other is coming to understand the experience. So you can't understand the experience if you haven't had it. But oftentimes we have meditative experiences that we don't understand until someone explains them to us. And that's the function of teachers and of books, of Dharma books. And, this is what sets apart someone like the Buddha and really sort of the brilliant masters who figure things out for themselves, who don't need someone else to say, oh, what you just experienced is this, suffering and the cause of suffering. And you sort of, oh, wow, okay, I understand now how all my thoughts about, my vacation are actually causing dukkha, and we put these things together. Oh, right, okay. We all have those moments of insight when we hear a teacher say something, we go, oh, right. And I've had people say to me, oh, you gave me so much insight. And I was like, no, I didn't give you insight. You had the experience. And then I said something that showed you what that experience was. So you were ready to hear it, just like Baha'ya. You were right on the verge of it. It's like I say, if you walk up to the ordinary person in the street who has no meditative or spiritual experience or reflective experience, and you start to tell them the Dharma, they'll be like, what? Go away. You're crazy. I don't want to hear you. What are you talking about? They won't understand it. They won't grasp it. Like, who cares that everything's impermanent? That, I mean, it's like that won't mean anything to them. What do you mean there's suffering in the cause of suffering? I'm not suffering. I'm fine. Leave me alone, because you have to experience these things. You have to, take the little step-by-step process. So I don't know if this qualifies as a real Dharma talk. It's kind of a meta. You can't use that word now because of Facebook. Man, they screw up these things. But anyway, I will use it with a small m, M-E-T-A, a meta Dharma talk. We're not a M-E-T-T-A, not loving kindness, but talking about Dharma. Yeah, and just to say, I mean, I'll say a couple more things that this can be really, to me, some of the real fun in studying Dharma is like discovering little gems, right? And, I was reading this before we started recording, that I'm reading this book called The Fire is Upon Us about James Baldwin and William F. Buckley. And they had a famous debate in 1965 at Cambridge University. It's kind of one of those things you run into on YouTube now and then. But, reading this, Baldwin, is just so full of Dharma that I'm like, underlining and putting little marks on the pages I want to go back to. Because once we start to look for the Dharma, it's not just in Dharma books, right? This is one of the points of, my book, Living Kindness. I have a chapter called The Greed, Hatred, and Delusion Report, and it's about reading the news. And so I try to bring that Dharma perspective to the news. Like, oh, there's hatred, there's war, oh, there's greed, there's another company that's well, today there was the report of the Biden administration challenging all these ticket companies like Ticketmaster not to charge right extra prices. Oh, that's the greed part of the Greed, Hatred, and Delusion report, and the delusion is like, oh, here's this watch that if you get this $25,000 watch, then you're going to be happy, you're going to have status, your life is going to be all better. Yeah, so there was something I was reading actually today of Buckley. I'm trying to see if I have it marked out, if I can diverge into something else. No, maybe not. He's so brilliant at taking apart America and showing us to ourselves and who we are. Oh, here it is, actually. This is now I'm just digressing, and I'll open things up, but so he's talking about the problem. I'm going to actually summarize more of what he says, and the problem of America partly not having any like clear identity, historical identity, and that we wind up, our identity then becomes tied in with materialism, and it reminded me of how, people, like, their identity becomes like the designer clothing they're wearing. It's like, or the car that they're driving, or the sports team they're rooting for, or these things that are really don't have any depth of meaning for us. And yeah. And so he winds up, winds up saying, like, status and financial status then becomes kind of your identity. And that's why one of the roles that then Black people represent the bottom of that status, so that you always know that you're, if you're white, you always can maintain a better status. It's just, so Dharma, racism, they're all friends. So I've rambled, and I don't know if that inspires any kind of participation, but I welcome you to speak. I saw Eric leaning in. I'll call it. You go after Eric, okay, Steve?
I thought Steve beat me to it, but I'll take it. Can you hear me?
Well, I don't know. I saw you leaning towards your computer, and I was like, "Oh, Eric's going to say something."
Eric's
cool.
My friend. Go ahead, buddy.
Thank you. Well, such an interesting talk, and it relates to me so much about the reading in the Big Book and in the 12 steps, because I feel the same way about
right.
Dharma that I do about the Big Book. I didn't understand anything I was seeing or reading or
right.
hearing when I was in the rooms or in early sobriety, but now it's starting slowly to make a little bit more sense. And something that gets said in the rooms here in Hawaii a lot is like, oh, the Menehune went in and changed the words in the Big Book again, because I didn't catch certain things, at times. And I've read the Big Book many, many times. And without fail, I read one of those stories in the back and I'm like, wow, I never really caught that, and my experience with the Dharma has been very similar. It's like, I bought these books and sometimes 1,000-page tomes and thinking I'm going to get through this and then I'll reach enlightenment, when it's really just exactly like my sobriety. It's a slow trudge, and that can be frustrating at times, but I like the parallel between my spiritual journey and my sobriety, because things just keep getting better, And so I love to be able to come to rooms like this and the rooms of 12 steps, just because you guys all kind of seem to understand these things, and my experience with the with my meditation has been a major part of my 12-step recovery, just to be able to see my mind. I didn't know I was crazy until I became I didn't know I was crazy until I started meditating.
Right.
I experienced recently where, I've got the committee in my head, and I think probably a lot of people know what I'm talking about. And here in Hawaii, we often call it the itty bitty shitty committee. And maybe we've heard that somewhere else too. I don't know.
Charming.
And it's those destructive and negative thoughts that are constantly badgering me. And it was going on in my head. And then it was like this other subtle voice in response just said, hey, you don't know me, to these other voices. And I thought that was such a profound experience for me, because I'm starting to fight back on some of those voices, and I don't know if fight's the right word, because I don't want a battle going on in my head, but to be able to recognize, that like what those negative and destructive voices are saying aren't true. And it gave me some peace. So I wanted to share that with the group. And thank you for letting me share.
That's great, Eric. Thank you. And going back to what you just started with, like, it's so interesting, isn't it? Because it's the same thing. I definitely have had that experience with the big book, and certainly with Dharma reading. Like, I know I've read that. I must have seen that before. I've read this, but wait. And again, I think that really speaks to where you are when you're reading it, right? Not to state the obvious or restate the obvious, but when you're ready to hear it. But I just do want to reaffirm the idea that there isn't somewhere to get to. There isn't some accumulation of knowledge that solves anything, that we can be just as enlightened right now, or just by being present. That's always going to be the core challenge, and the core task is to be present, to be kind. Is there something else? I don't know. Seems like enough. So, Steve, go ahead.
Thank you. Way to go, Eric. We can crosstalk here. This isn't a 12-step meeting. Real quick, I just, this is completely unrelated, but it's perfect for the way the conversation went. And I have a new fellow in my 12-step FA program who was just started reading your book. And I said, oh, Kevin Griffin, he's my Dharma teacher. And we And so then he starts going on about, he told me he was a Buddhist. And, oh, really? And so he's doing
Watch
this
out.
stuff.
Watch out for those Buddhists.
All I want is a Siskel and Ebert answer from you, like a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Because he's promoting this thing. I've never heard of this, and you probably have, but I've never heard it. Is SGI Nichiren Buddhism?
Nichiren Shoshu Buddhism.
Okay, and then there's a Daisaku Aikida. Anyway, then he starts going off on the ninth consciousness, and I said, what is all this about? So there's different schools of Buddhism, Steve. I mean, you know that. And so Nichiren Shoshu comes out of Japan. It's like a basically medieval Japanese practice that was kind of developed to give people a ritual way of practicing. It doesn't involve meditation. They chant a sutta or sutra, and it's been turned into this almost like cultish thing where it's like, oh, if you chant this, then you'll get everything you want. And so it's that's about it. I mostly have negative connotations with it. But I don't know enough about it to speak about it intelligently. But just to say that, what I teach comes out of the Theravada Buddhist tradition, which is not, so it's a just totally different school. It's like, I'm a Christian. Okay, well, there's a big difference between a Catholic and a Mormon, or a Baptist and a Presbyterian, so it's that kind of thing where they don't really even speak the same language. Got it. Well, I went to the website, and that was my initial take, just with the way you described it. So thank you. I just wanted to ask the question.
It's very popular, and Tina Turner was a practitioner, and Chick Corea, and so a lot of famous musicians have gotten into it. So I actually used to work with a keyboard player who did that practice anyway.
I'll
don't
stick
know.
with Theravada Buddhism and Kevin Griffin work.
You know, you do what you see fit. Mary Helen.
Hey, Kevin, thank you.
Hi.
Because you mentioned it, I wanted to come back to something you mentioned on Tuesday,
Oh, yeah.
the craving for an
Extermination.
extermination.
Yes.
I had a very different take on it.
Ooh.
And it was what made sense to me was not extermination in terms of the obliteration of the physical being or death or craving for death, which
Right.
is where the discussion went.
It
seemed to me that the not being was not being aware, not being conscious of my feelings, not
Absolutely.
feeling my feelings. And that really resonated for me. What was I looking for in the drinking that I was doing?
Right.
I wanted to escape from the feelings and the awareness and the thoughts, and blackouts were great.
Right.
So at any rate, I'm going to hold on to that because I sort of didn't relate to the craving for death.
Right. No, I mean, that's the extreme of it, but I think there's a spectrum, and what you're talking about, I think, is much more really what the Buddha is talking about. And what's really relevant, it's directly relevant to the condition of being an addict, and the causality behind being an addict is trying to stop feeling and stop the pain,
Well, I think I'm particularly aware of that right now because my granddaughter is now expressing the tendency to addiction, and she has just gone off on a 60 to 90 day a recovery in the wilderness of Utah.
Wow.
And I find myself turning to wanting distraction from the pain of that. Yeah. And really needing to focus my meditation on acceptance of that and hope for her, and not obliterating that the pain of that from my consciousness. So yeah, thanks for letting me share that.
Yeah, that's great. And it really brings up, again, like a variety of questions and issues, because it is so important to allow ourselves to feel. And I think it's also important to step away from those painful feelings. That it's not, it's one thing to like binge on something in an unhealthy way, but it's also not, I don't think, unskillful for a layperson, particularly, to say, well, I'm just going to chill right now for watch a movie because I want to take my mind off my problems. Because if you're focusing on like, oh, I'm feeling this, and my granddaughter, that's all you're thinking about. That just creates, it's not tenable, And I think there can be that tendency to feel like, oh, if I'm really spiritual or I'm a Buddhist, I should be present for this constantly. It's like, no, I don't think so. I think you should take a break and be kind to yourself.
But not to the point. I mean, what I've found myself doing is turning to sugar, which is,
yeah. Well,
it's mood altering for me. So I'm having to be really conscious of that. But I think what you're saying, being kind to ourselves, I've been watching Harry Potter.
Oh yeah, I love those. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a delicate balance. It really is, and especially for addicts, we know that the different sensitivities we have. My go-to right now is The Extraordinary Attorney Wu. I don't know if anybody's watched that, but it's just, there's such a sweetness to that show. Anyway, we have one more hand up. Karen, hello, before we go.
Sorry, trying to find that mute button.
There you go. You got it.
So I don't have much to say. I was actually, like Mary Helen, I was going to ask you to speak more on that concept of the desire for what you said was extermination. And interestingly, I just wanted to share that I heard desire for extinction. I'm not sure why I heard that.
Yeah.
I'm a biologist, so that's maybe that's why that came up for me. But anyway, I appreciate that you spoke with Mary Helen about it, because that helped me understand better what it was that you meant.
Yeah, it comes out of the Buddha's teachings on the Four Noble Truths when he says there are three causes for suffering: sensual desire, or the craving for sensual desire, the craving for existence, and the craving for extermination. But it's translated in different ways. And one of the ways it's sometimes translated is the craving to be and the craving to not be. And so there actually can be something about ego in there as well. So we might think of it as having a kind of potential spiritual element to it. Like wanting to let go of your self-centeredness could be like a positive version of that.
Sure.
So I think it's one of those things, another one of those things that I read and I think it'd be really good to get Bhikkhu Bodhi on here so we could talk about this, because it's like, very interesting, yeah. So but I think it is worth reflecting on for each of us, just as a kind of, thing to take with you, what does that mean, and I think it does take different forms. The desire to fall asleep, when I was really depressed in high school, I would just come home from school and go to sleep, and I still sort of know that feeling of like, I just wanted to go into the cocoon of sleep, which is very much like the cocoon of, heroin, basically. So that, yes, annihilation. Yes. Thank you, Angela. Extermination, to not be, just want to get away from it all. Well, all right, you guys. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you. I don't know why. It's a funny thing. I realized, why am I thanking you for coming? Anyway, it's nice to, when I started doing this 3 years ago, I figured, well, at some point, people are just going to like not come on Friday nights and all. But so here we are. It's lovely to have this as a routine, and I enjoy it. So I will be back on Tuesday morning. And I will mention next Saturday, anybody who's in the Bay Area, North Bay particularly, I'm going up to Kelseyville for a day-long retreat where I'm going to teach on the Anapanasati Sutta, and I might have it on my website. If you need to go, please go. But I'm just going to look really quickly at my website and see if
it's on your website.
It is. Okay, good. I'll put a link into that right now for people. It's going to be a hybrid event, so it'll be on Zoom. The center is called A Positive Light. Here is the link on my website. So it'll be like a 10 to 5. And as I said, the Anapanasati Sutta, which is the teaching on mindfulness of breathing, it's basically the really basic. It starts with the very basic meditation technique, but it goes through these 16 steps. I've written 200 pages on it, so I'm trying to boil that down. It's going to be one of those. It might be one of those annoying days when Kevin gets too deep into the weeds, and people are like, "You're like, oh, really? tell me something useful.
Kevin, will
Yes.
you also have your retreat in February on your webpage?
Yeah, do I don't, that's not, I will, but it's not up because we haven't got the contract yet. So I kind of will wait until we have the contract. But yeah, that's going to be and right at the end of February,
How many
looking
days, Kevin?
the 27th to the, yes, Tuesday to Sunday, 27th of February until the 3rd of March. So you can, what do they say? Hold that date, save that date.
The same
Yeah,
place
that's-
you've been doing your retreats? the
Yeah,
last
it'll be
couple of years?
Redwood Glen.
Oh, great.
And then in May, I'll be down at the Big Bear Retreat Center outside LA with Vimalasara. So yeah, a lot of retreats next year, it looks like, if I
All right.
make it. All right, guys.
Thank you, Kevin.